I'm joined now by Professor Bheki Mngomezulu, Professor of Political Science and International Relations. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Just your thoughts overall on what you heard the U.S. President saying there.
Good afternoon, Putbuyo, and good afternoon to your viewers. I must say that for an outgoing president, what he said was refreshing on many fronts. One thing that impressed me was his tone, saying that basically moving away from this thinking that America can do it alone. He kept on saying that he needs collaboration from all partners, be they G7 members or any other country from any part of the world. That was refreshing. The second thing, of course, was his statement about the need to change what has been happening in the UN Security Council, to try and democratize it. Because if there is one institution that, in my view, has been undemocratic for many years, it is the UN Security Council. And I'm glad that in his last speech, President Biden is making that point and then, of course, making a call that there is a need to change what has been happening all along. And then, of course, this issue of touching different parts of the globe, saying that as much as America is willing and able to assist, but then, of course, Americans will need the support of other countries. And then he started mentioning a lot of other countries where there is political instability, and then pledged that America will continue to do well. So I think for an outgoing president, I was generally happy with these statements. Of course, the reality in terms of executing what he said is something else. But as for the speech, I'm happy with what he said.
Is that, though, I mean, the fact that he's outgoing, you know, is that not what allowed him to get away with saying whatever he could say, even though he may not have meant it? After all, he's got nothing to lose. He's on his way out, whatever happens in that U.S. presidential election. So he could afford, someone would argue, to say the things he said, whereas he would have been a lot more guarded if, for example, he was still in the race for the U.S. presidency.
No, we are posing a very critical question, Putbuyo, but I still maintain that even for someone who was going to contest in the upcoming election, the speech would have, in fact, ticked the boxes, in the sense that we have had a time when we were talking about a bipolar world, where America was controlling the capitalist world of the West, while Russia was controlling the socialist world of the East. Then 1989, 1990, with the collapse of Russia, then we had a unipolar world which was dominated by America. So basically, America wanting to dictate everything that happens, be it on diplomacy, be it on funding multilateral institutions, as Trump tried to do, all those kinds of things. So even if he was on the race, I think his speech would have given him a plus, in the sense that he is deviating from that mentality that America can do it alone. And it's also basically debunking this myth that we are still in a unipolar world which is controlled by America. Now the world is becoming multipolar, with China coming into the picture, Singapore and many other countries coming to the picture, Russia trying to rise again. So we are faced with a reality where this idea that America is controlling the world is phasing out. And then I think even if he was going to remain in the race, the speech, in my view, would still be relevant.
But let's take his comments around China, for example, where he says they are ready to, you know, collaborate with China. And it would seem, I mean, further down, he then goes on to say that we should avoid China veering off, or China being, or the weapons, you know, being used against us, which means that it's more of a, or suggests to me that it's more of a security concern, you know, than a keenness or an eagerness to actually work with China for a better world. In other words, it's more out of fear.
Putbuyo, you are absolutely right. In international relations theory, there is something called realism. Realism states that all countries are self-interested and everything is state-centric, meaning everything revolves around the state, and all states want to amass power at all costs, be it financial power, diplomatic power, military power, and otherwise. Now, if you have America occupying that space basically monopolizing that space. And then all of a sudden, with a country like China coming to the picture, you definitely have to recognize China as a competitor, and then you have to treat China with respect. Truth be told, within the African continent, China has made significant inroads. And then, of course, using BRICS, we know that the de-dollarization is also weakening America. These are some of the realities that America is faced with. So your point about saying that it's not a matter of choice for President Biden to want to work with China, the situation dictates that he does that. Because if he doesn't, chances are other countries will rally behind China, and then China might in no time replace America as a superpower. So we are mindful of that. We are thinking about the future of your country. We are thinking about your legacy. We are also thinking about the reality, and then need to do a balancing act. So in that context, I agree with you that some of the statements he's making, especially around China, are not statements that he voluntarily made, but are statements that are dictated by the current situation, and then, of course, looking into the future beyond his presidency.
I know the war has, put a spin on things, but why wouldn't or didn't the United States show the same realism? You know, the fears that were expressed by the Russians, for example, that having NATO on their doorstep was the most dangerous things that could happen to them. But the Americans didn't show that realism. They didn't even acknowledge what is prepared to acknowledge now when you're talking about China. Of course, China is much more powerful, but why not?
There is this thing of complacency. If you have been in the lead for too long, it's just like a sprinter who has been winning all the races. Then chances of the person preparing thoroughly are very slim because the person knows I'm going to win anyway. We have made the statement when talking about the ANC in South Africa, saying that complacency has been the reason why the ANC got 40%, for example. So in this case, it also applies in the American situation in the sense that for many years, America was living under the illusion that it is untouchable until, of course, we had 9/11, where they were attacked in their own backyard. Then they started looking at things differently. Then, of course, you had the presidency of Barack Obama, who was a realistic person who looked into the real world out there and then tried to mend the walls, as it were, forging relations with Cuba, forging relations with North Korea, forging relations with a lot of other countries. Then came Trump. He reversed all of that, going back to complacency, basically living in a dream that America was still the power and nobody was going to touch America. Now we have Biden, who has come in. When he started off, we're not too sure whether he was going to side with Obama coming from his own party, or he was going to continue from where Donald Trump had left off. So he has tried to play middle ground in a way. In some instances, we expected him to come out clearly, but he didn't. And then in some instances, he tried to basically continue from where Barack Obama had left off. So the statements he's making today, in my view, would have fitted well with Barack Obama in the sense that you are acknowledging the entire globe. You are moving away from the unipolar mentality. You are now recognizing the multipolar world. So in that sense, I would say complacency has been one of the characteristic features of America, to their own detriment, of course, which is why we are seeing the rise of China, more especially when they are making these inroads in the African continent and making sure that BRICS become a force to be reckoned with, leading to what I've referred to as the dollarization, which is going to weaken American currency and therefore reduce America's global power.
Let's take his papers and it on this note. We have run out of time. On the Middle East, he keeps going back to or says things like Hamas started the war. Hezbollah was unprovoked, right? And then he goes on to say, well, the two-state theory solution is what will work. But I'm comparing him or contrasting him with the UN Secretary General, right? Antonio Guterres says, for those who go on to undermine the goal with more settlements, more land grabs, and more incitement, I ask, what is the alternative? How can the world accept the state in which a large number of Palestinians are excluded without any freedom, right, or dignity? And I'm comparing the two.
Putvuyo, if you are an American president, you are going to face challenges because you want to set a legacy, but then you also have to respond to America's foreign policy. America's foreign policy is clear on certain countries and global in general. You know that they are friends with Israel. No matter what Benjamin Netanyahu does to annihilate the people of Palestine, America will see no fault in that. So that is America's foreign policy. It doesn't really matter who the president is at any given time. So this talk that Hamas is to blame for what is happening is in fact a lie, a blatant lie. Because the question we're going to ask is, on the 7th of October, did Hamas wake up and then suddenly decided they're going to disturb that music festival? The answer is no. They were reacting to situations that had been happening when Israel did not want to recognize Palestine as an independent entity. So basically what they did was a reaction to something that was happening as opposed to them starting the war. So those who are holding that view, including the statement by Biden, they are in fact misreading the situation and they're just scratching the surface without necessarily going to the detail of what really happened and how the war started.
Professor Mngomezulu, thanks as always. Really appreciate it.